Since my voice is disappearing very rapidly after that last session, I'm going to be supremely brief, since we actually do have one of those few occasions where you can say literally the person about to appear before you doesn't need any introduction. Although I can introduce 2 books for you. How's that? We had planned to try and sell these books, but we weren't able to succeed in the operation. We were going to sell both the new, recent, quite wonderful Charles Bernstein book from the University of Chicago, Topsy-Turvy. You should see the wonderful Topsy-Turvy cover, courtesy of Susan B. on the front. And this is the Boundary 2 special issue dealing with Charles and his work, which is now about 6 months old, which also has in inverted form, unfortunately, an image provided to us by Susan B. So we don't have this copy, but you're free to beg, borrow, or maybe at the end of tomorrow even steal some of these, okay? You know Charles Bernstein is the holder of the, has been the holder of a chair at the University of Pennsylvania and has retired recently from there into the glory of free writing. And has been, up until just the other day, famously an immensely distinguished American writer in academia who has only a BA. We can no longer say that since he's now come here with an honorary degree from Ohio, and so it's a day or 2 old. So, but we decided we can't say Dr. Bernstein.
Wikipedia says.
Wikipedia.
Honorary degree.
The people.
You
people
can't say that, but I can write prescriptions.
Yes. In that case, it's the Vox Populi. Charles has been an important figure in the Boundary 2 group for a long time, guiding and contributing to the journal's work in poetry internationally as well as in the North American context, and has often put us in contact with other poets and writers, particularly poets, who have helped us build additional projects with poetry and the criticism of poetry inside the journal. We owe him an enormous amount of gratitude, and I especially, we agree that it would be most appropriate for him to be here, even as a member of only the editorial board, which he has served on graciously for some long time. So I'm not going to go on and on because you don't want to hear my voice, you want to hear his voice sing. So with that, I introduce Charles Bernstein.
It's great to be here. So for the folks who just come in, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Boundary 2. And Boundary 2 has such an incredible relationship to American poetry in its history, with issues of the kind of people who were really my heroes when I was younger, full issues with critical thinking about them, partly through William Spanos. And actually, William Spanos, the journal's 50 years old, but my involvement with Boundary 2 goes back about 44 years, 1978, where Bill Spanos published. Now, at that time, it had nothing to do with academia at all. I did go to college, but at that point, I was just, I was just starting to edit a magazine, poetry magazine, but I did write something on Stanley Cavell, which he published as an important essay for me. That was the first thing that was in Boundary 2, and then I've done many things after. So this reading is also a little bit of a tribute to Paul. As you can see, I'm going to read some new work and also a few things from Topsy-Turvy. Try to keep it to a lot of different kinds of work. This piece is called "It's Not My Bag." It really bugs me when you say that, man. It's not my bag, man. You are bumming me out. Maybe it's the other guy's bag. Maybe it's your bag, man. But it's not my bag. No how, no way. What a drag. So uncool. I got my own bag, man. And I don't need that bag. Can you dig that? I'm telling you, man, you're really chilling my vibe. My bug is... My bag is mellow, man, and I don't dig what's coming down. Like I say, man, it's not my bag. So that's an exact verbatim transcript of the way that me and my friends talked in the late 1960s. Pretty much all we ever said, too. Often it referred to the war in Vietnam and so on, but racism, but this was basically the vibe. This one, I'm actually reading poems that I have not really read from this book, so it's an odd, but this one is for those who remember the Robert Frost, John F. Kennedy poem, inaugural poem, The Gift Outright. It's a very short poem. You break it, you bought into it. We were the fire before the fire was ours. Now it's theirs. There is no hope greater than despair, and despair is no hope at all. I guess that's one of those struggles with your strong predecessors, right? And this one too. The Wages of Pascal. My mind's a bind in double and triple blinds. Scarcely can I see what's right in front of me. I stumble and stare at things no longer there. My head's in the hopper, unscrambled by Doppler. The planet is warming, but not to me. I did it and do it and take no responsibility. Art's a drag, thinking a bore. I pretend to doodle, but to tell the truth, I'm sore. No doubt these rhymes annoy you, but face it, it's because they suit you to a T. What happened to disjunction, parasols, and ennui? So now I'm going to do a first theatrical presentation of this work here at Dartmouth, Amberium, with Paul Beauvais playing the lead character of Caudio Amberian. This is called Amberianum, the philosophical fragments of Caudio Amberian. And in the off chance that some of you may not know, this is in such small time, much about Caudio Amberian, I have an extended note about him. Caudio Amberian was a Jewish poet and sophist of the 1st century CE, so around 30 to 75. He was likely born near Alexandria and spoke and read Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. He may have studied with Philo before moving to Rome around 60. In Rome, Amberian started a small school for sophistry, where he engaged students in Socratic-style dialogues. In addition, Amberian was a counselor to Nero in the last years of his reign, following the fire. And he helped set the ground for the move of Josephus and his entourage from Jerusalem to Rome in 71. The only previous translation of Amberian's work is an untitled poem that I published in Girly Man. At his school in Rome, Amberian spoke in broken or pidgin Latin that some of his students called barbaric. The only records we have of his writings are Latin transcriptions made by those notoriously unreliable and sometimes hostile students. The Amberianum was reconstructed from shreds and shards at the Sid Caesar Center for Dysgraphic Studies. Missing words and the seeming disconnected parts likely mar the work. The Latin manuscript was discovered on October 4th, 1895, buried under a former Minsk dry goods store. The story of the miraculous finding of the Amberian has been told in the award-winning book, The Oi, How the World Became Pataquarical. So I'm calling upon Paul Beauvais, thanks for his 50 years of editing, to read the Latin. I had very sketchy Latin and in constructing these poems in Latin, but I do the translations of these Latin poems. And so Paul will be reading the Amberian as close as we can come to the original.
Since I was taught my Latin by the Jesuits, my accent is completely wrong.
But that's
That's
good for this particular.
absolutely. I will fragment it before
And I
you
wonder
turn to
how
it.
many people here will know that it's wrong.
Raise your hand when I'm wrong. Abolens sensus numquam liberare cogitatione.
Abolishing reason will never free thought.
Etiam homo Faustus scribere posse bonum carmen, sed suus non amo.
Even a self-righteous man can write a good poem, but it's not likely.
Precavio osor qui clamet odisti.
Beware of the bigot who shouts out, "Bigot!"
Nonum quam homo qui mendaci loquimini veritatem.
Even a liar sometimes must tell the truth.
O dii magna protecut nobis adversum malis qui consumator per justitia.
May the gods save us from those consumed by their righteousness.
Colophos est Kyridotus punctum.
A cuff is not a sleeve, but this could also be translated, a blow is not the full chemise. It's not the full chemise. I couldn't decide
Yes.
which one was better. A cuff is not a sleeve.
Estas alga mutates in hiberna malo granatum.
Summer seaweed becomes winter pomegranates.
Si paratextus fortior poemos sequitur fornicando fortior amor.
If paratext is more important than poem, does it follow that love is more important than sex?
Perceptio perceptio e scriptum.
You like that hard C?
It's
See, I would have said
I'm-
perceptio est scriptum.
Yeah, I know, but
My
that's not
very
what
limited.
not what he would have said.
Okay.
Yeah, he would have said perceptio. Yeah, we can fragment. it
However,
later.
I'm sure of my translation.
Yes, absolutely.
Perception is textual.
To the point. Omni scriptura est pupilla.
All texts are orphans.
Perspicientia est sensus vigilantis.
Knowledge is a matter of minding sense.
Ubi erat veret caper detondetur vitulum.
Where the goat strays, the calf is shorn. So you have to think about these things. You'll go home later and it will hit you what Amberium is really getting at there.
Rarum est meror nomas.
Seldom is grief misplaced.
Omne iter fluxum.
Every journey takes a turn.
Cultura est opinionabilis.
Cultivation is a matter of opinion.
In fragmenta veritas.
Truth is in pieces.
Vivus et vigeo. Argumentum injustitia Deus.
The fact that you are alive and thriving is proof that the gods are not just.
I have that on my door. Remissio prope nihil, desiderium dono divum.
Forgiveness is overrated. Regret is a gift of gods.
Quid nunc videtur priori numquam imaginabilis.
What was unimaginable an hour ago is unforgettable now, or it could be unimaginable hours ago, unforgettable now.
Proximi sui ruina unius hominis felicitatem.
One man's catastrophe is his neighbor's good fortune.
Servus absolvo illusion licentia, dominus amat fraudis.
A slave is free of the illusion of freedom, from which his master takes pleasure.
Virtus est selectivam.
Virtue is selective.
Coitus est bonitas plus quam amor est tangibili.
The person's actually laughing at the Latin. I like
Yes,
that.
that's true.
This is
Puts you in a tough
that's
spot.
what I'm looking for. Sex is more virtuous than love because it is more tangible.
Amor abducet libido.
Love turns many from desire.
In vino exiguum clinamen veritas,
In wine, truth swerves.
sensus mentis dolum.
Perception is the finest trick of the mind.
Veritas nandum visibilis.
The truth remains to be seen.
Salus in numeris, donec numerus vester ascendit.
There is safety in numbers until your number is up.
Numquam nominare inane vacuum.
Never call a void.
Sine pullus nihilum ova.
If there were no chickens, there'd be no eggs.
Ignoratiam didicit.
Ignorance is learned.
Odium contagiosa est.
Hatred is contagious.
Maximo sinceritatis ironia.
Irony is the perfection of sincerity.
Veritas est scortum sumptuosus.
Truth is a pricey whore.
Judeorum dabo optimus pretium.
Jews will give you the best price.
Si vederis Judeus, dicere salve pro me.
If you see a Jew, be sure to say, I said hello.
Omni infringes punctum impotens etiam amare.
Everything breaks at its weakest point, including love.
Fragilitas solicito amatio.
Fragility is the root of love.
Quasi pardus est Judeus, sed absque maculis.
A Jew is like a leopard without the spots.
Enfin.
Well, and great to read that. A very odd piece. So just to make it apparent, I do know a little bit of Latin and enough to write that Latin. So that's my own Latin under the guise of Gaudio Amberium. So this is some recent stuff, and this one is called Shorter Russian Poem. Famine, plague, floods, rain, droughts, poverty, robberies, kidnappings, civil war, invasions, tyrannies upon tyrannies. And then the dark times begin. There's actually a joke that Eugene Ostashevsky told me. It's an old Russian joke that I thought to put into verse. So this is a piece that I wrote for Paul, dedicated to Paul, based largely on our correspondence over the last 2.5 years about some of the topics that he discussed earlier. And it's called Ocular Truth and the Irreparable Veil. And so it looks like this, and you'll see that it's been redacted because there's so much that I sometimes say that I feel is inappropriate. And so what I did was, well, I spent a lot of time writing the original. I didn't want to, so I just cut out what I thought would be, possibly objectionable. So it might have been the entire thing, but I still managed, because I did, after all, want to make this tribute to Paul, to allow just a little bit to slip through. And I thought of different ways of reading it, and I could go, I could make noise to indicate the blank spots, but I thought, well, it really is what it is, and I'll just read it as if those erasures don't exist, just like everyday life, right? You don't notice it, and you just accept all those things you block out. It just seems like fine. So, Ocular Truth and the Irreparable Veil. As an epigraph, nature is too much with us, or little we see in culture that is. Deficit is always the given, fate, acknowledgement of limitation or blindness. I don't know prerequisite, certain of that, sure. Every touch, the history of touch. Ocular proof, undisputable. Metaphysical pea inside in a shell's game. Shellacking, bluster, self-reflection. Irreparable, socially debilitating transfers. Liberalism is capitalism with a face. I want to be protected from it. Recovery is no more possible than redemption. Furious, revanchist, cultural politics. Economic slavery. Claims of culture high and low. Lying is not necessarily a means of hiding, of overturning it. Philo-Puritan. Contradictory impulses and dark sides pierces the narrative. Psychiatrically, the pierced create variant psychic. Each in turn is worse than the other. Harrowing, but hardly unique, forming an unbreakable bond. Too high a price, no doubt, paid by individuals who were not part of making the deal. Particularism can be of connections or insularity. Truth is diasporic. The Holy Land is exile. My kingdom for a hoof. What can any of us do to get our fellow citizens to jump off the train, hurtling them to the, but those of us on the chariot fleeing are deluded. Lots of window dressing when we need new windows, new frames. I'm an empiricist, a line backed up to tomorrow. Better a sitting duck, a moving duck, just duck. The world is not mine oyster. What shuts me out will not be pried open. Pry not where uninvited, lest demons swarm out to each own. If it don't, it won't pour. History haunts without determining, for as long as I can remember. Specter of the unhinged, unthought flash of the newly occurring, invariably dismissed as fantasy, bulldozed by, and alike, flickering utopian moment, hope and despair, singed together in song, our aesthetic horizon. is in crisis. This is its opportunity. Alfred Lord, the singer of Via, our real difficulty arises from the fact that we are not accustomed to thinking in terms of fluidity, difficult to grasp something that is multiform, necessary to construct an ideal text or seek an original, dissatisfied with an ever-changing phenomena. Cease trying to find an original. Each performance is an original. Meshuggah Yogi, if you are aware of it, it's not perfection. The kind of I want in order to form a more perfect disunion. Chickens are coming home to goose even as we find our noose is cooked. The geese are chicken, but drugs only make matters worse. One oxymoron said to the other oxymoron, not us, it's a yogi to baby blue. It's all over even when it's not. Louis Nice, modern 19. The pure music poet is hardly ever found in practice. Put words together merely for the sound they make, as all the denotations and connotations are to be discounted. Conventions of language, a poem entirely consisting of invented nonsense, phonetic ciphers. The meeting such a need to be nothing more than an ear, almost impossible, would not be worth doing. How can any of us listen to a language do not understand? How differentiated to such? To say is put together only for sounds it makes is to say that finds its own meaning rather than how long can any of us listen to a language before we suffocate? How differentiated are our reactions? Poems that may have been impossible have transformed what is possible to. Sometimes you gotta do what you can't do. And so in interpretation, during his speech, he said, a price of being marked as is to imagine you are Kostenbaum. The tragedy of Oscar Wilde is not that he was ruined. The tragedy is that he did not live long enough to enjoy his ruin. Repeated and contradictory, of fools. One thing to die can live with, but this getting old. I think you're pronouncing the name wrong. It's Nabokov, not so proudly hailed Omerta or Blood Oath, the precarious demographic shifts iconized by reason resistant. Russellini has Socrates saying in almost every scene that the most important thing is to acknowledge what you don't know, which means to continuously question what you do, that the truth is not knowing. We need, in other words, to find in ourselves. Otherwise, we become hooded. There are no absolutes is also an absolute, a trap of relativism. All beliefs are equal since there is no one overriding truth. This is not the same as saying all truths are social and historical, while all the while hopping on one foot, exclaiming that aesthetic and ethical judgment are of different kinds, dances to different drummers than scientific knowledge. In the sphere of aesthetics and ethics, there are conflicting, incommensurable truths. Still, that does not diminish an urgent task of finding, not making truth. Finding by making by finding by founding, making by foundering. Speak truth to truth. Peter Sheldal in The New Yorker, October 19th, 2020, on those who support showing the work of Philip Guston. Quote, suddenly silhouetted, the faction is made up of a scant minority of citizens who take an active interest in art and espouse cosmopolitan values, the culturally privileged, whom museums represent and serve, while these days laudably trying to extend their appeal to neglected audiences, unquote. Is art only to be shown that depicts in frame-locked forms? And if only one interpretation is possible, then that is saying only what aspires to kitsch or the didactic. But Sheldal says that only, quote, cosmopolitan audiences could override the idea of the museum as a safe space. Does he and really want to use a word that has long been associated with rootless in an article about one of them and his attempts to make art about anti and racism? Surely the problem is that Gustin's figures are too legible, especially when coming from rootless cosmopolitans and cultural Bolsheviks. Outside the Blake show at the Tate in London, challenging imagery, aesthetic liberty. Do you mean Eliotic or idiotic? David Bergman in correspondence. Last summer, I went to the museum. I wish, if an artist gives, my oldest friend's grandmother had an expression: if you like it, good luck to you. And form, the double consciousness, the bookends of ishness. I want totters on the verge of never losing the sigh of precarity. Oi, men. So, for Paul. So, I am going to have questions after this, but I'm going to be answering the questions that you have with the next set of poems, as you'll see. Pathetic fallacy. Never mind there's no hole so deep you don't get banged when you hit bottom, or that the zombies have overtaken the Capitol. I still hear nightingale songs every time I see pigeons nosediving in early morning hail, whose icy spitballs remind me of paradise. This one is for Tom Lynn. It's called Fixing the Bishop's Nose. It's a long way to the tip of a prairie, a long way to hem and hone earth's hearth, a hardened heart, gobbled by limited term incentives. Act now. The terms of art, loss shoveled over loss with a fine porcelain glaze, or is it glade? The words get confused in a cornucopia of dyspraxia, left for right, but not up for down. Dunces, dances, rock solid, a headlong plank tailgating to is real until is not, O Zion. Sock me a solid, soiled ox, blemish like totally, prayer shawl in my other pants, coil on overnight. Theodicy. Or is it theocracy? Or the Odyssey? I get all those words mixed up. One thing's for sure. God better not still be playing dice, 'cause they are already deep in a hole, and knees will be broken before the night is out, and not just knees. This poem is for Ian Probstein, and I'm reading it because he has a wonderful piece in this issue, and I'm so happy, to have this here and to acknowledge what it is. It's really a fantastic thing to have, and to have Paul edit, and focuses just to some degree on non-U.S. connections to what I'm doing. So Ian Probstein is a Russian-American poet and translator, just finished translating a book of Mandelstam. So this is for Ian, and he has an article in there on he translated a book of mine into Russian. And it has an epigraph from Mandelstam. On the window panes of eternity, my breath, my warmth has already settled. I am neither referent nor referee, refugee nor redeemer, projector nor projection, draft nor final cut, neither the one who calls nor the one chosen, anagram nor abstraction. My breath disappears from the window more quickly than it formed. This poem is called Animals Are People Too, or at least they used to be. I get confused as to what you are supposed to say. I wouldn't join a species that had me as a member. Free choice is sacred, so don't let any of those plutocrats tell me what to say here on earth. It's a tough time for right thinking and left thinking too. Personally, I am bicameral. I use my phone to take pictures even when riding a camel. Just watch the humps and the bumps will take care of themselves. This is a very short poem, title in just one line. The title is People Are the Same the World Over. I am not the same as myself. Maybe some of you have that. This is one of my self-help series. A lot of people experience these things. They don't know other people have those same problems, ontological problems. And this is another one in that series. But I know some of you will be experiencing this. It's called Capitalism Gaslighted Me. And so did Heidegger and Thomas Jefferson. God too, if truth be told. The verdict is out on my parents, but it's not looking good. And I'm beginning to think I'm gaslighting myself. This is a poem beginning almost with a line by Duncan. Often I am permitted to spin, flip, go turvy top, turning toward unmade places, shadows, sites of last chances in a game of Loopdeloo, falling down on unyielding ground. Often I recoil from the permission I've taken, unsanctioned, want to crawl back to. Well, that's the problem. No idea where. The past sure folded fast. The power of heartlessness in the bitter cold of flight frightens me more than I care to say or can begin to tell. This is called Malediction for Habib Tengor's 75th birthday, and Habib is also in this book. He's an Algerian French writer living in Paris. Malediction. My diction's at the glue factory, while I'm all akimbo, what with the state of this and the failure of that, added to the news never was new, just a downward spin of a story heard long ago and can't kick, something about dead ends just before the roads go public, or meaning one thing and saying two, for both of us, all three. Remember those westerns where they keep saying, we'll head him off at the pass? I keep trying, but it never works. They always beat me to it. Or maybe I went to the wrong pass. This work is called Being and Nothingness. First the rabbi, then cantor, then synagogue president stand before the Torah ark on Yom Kippur and profess with piercing cries that echo the shofar that they, each one, is nothing in the face of the Almighty. The worshipers surrounding them in the vast temple weep and moan, awed by the pious self-abnegation of their exalted leaders. After a few moments, the poet errant, standing in a dank corner of the shul reserved for those who have not purchased High Holy Day tickets, murmurs loud enough to be heard by the entire assembly, "I am nobody. I am no one. I am nothing." The altar cocker shouts back, "What a schmuck to have the chutzpah to claim to be nothing." And there are, as appropriate, two commentaries on this work. The first, the poet errant faced the congregation and defiantly proclaimed, "I am somebody. I am." The altar cocker replied sotto voce, "What chutzpah for this nobody to say they're somebody." And that was provided by Norman Fisher. And this final commentary, "Praise be thou," this is Pierre Joris's translation of Psalm by a fragment by Paul Celan. "Praise be thou, no one. For your sake we want to flower. Toward you, a nothing we were, we are, we will remain, flowering, the nothing, the no one's rose." And this one for Yunta Huang, and this is a poem that's discussed in this, in a marvelous and hysterically funny piece by Yunta Huang. And the title will seem odd, and I have to explain it to avoid anybody taking offense. This was a name of a dish that Susan and I found in a Chinese banquet hall, a restaurant. And I've written a poem based on this title, and the title is Jellyfish with Jew's Ear. And it was very good. Very good. Jellyfish with Jew's Ear. And Yunta talks about this if you want to have further commentary on it. But here's the poem for Yunta. "Sometimes a fascist is just a fascist, but we don't talk that way around here. It'll be a slow boat to China before the moonbeams hit the stargaze, deep under the seventh seal. 8 if we count you." This poem is called Mainstream. Mainstream. "I write the poems I write. I write the poems I write, I write. I write the poems. I write the poems I write. The poems I write, I write. I write the poems I write. I write the poems I write, I write. I write the poems. I write the poems. I write the poems." Catch as, of course, that was Frank Zappa. You know, he would do this for like 2 hours, just play those kind of chords over and over again to mock his audience, which is a terrible thing to do. Catch as catch could. Memories cloud memory like that, say, just outside of Yuma. It must have been Channel 11, $1 million movie, though maybe 9. To gather together, to gather with flowers, to gather stones together, to father sorrow, to remember to gather. Bitter greens. I'm just doing this in the meantime. Some of these are just inappropriate, you know, and having to really think it through. No, well, this one is, but I'm going to do it because it's short. But I want to apologize in advance. And it's really just encoding ugly social things. And I reject the thoughts here. It's a very short, again, just a title and 3-word poem. The title is Jew Will Not Replace Us. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. The patois of pathos. It's the same so much pain expressed on the outside while inside you're placid as a frozen margarita, knowing after all's done, all spoke, you'll die like nobody else. Resentment. The poet errant, ever closer to death, gets a rare acknowledgement from the congregation president, plus the handsome sum of 30 gold coins. They should give that gold to our Reb, says a devout follower, for Reb has always been a more devout person and a superior reader of the Torah than this poet. And for those reasons, Reb has always scorned this poet's work and spurned this poet's friendship. Surely it is our Reb who deserves this award. The poet errant nodded in assent. What little I have accomplished is as much because of those shame me as love me. Fear not, friends. No amount of gold or recognition will ever rob you of your pride. So just three more poems. And this one is called, What Were You Saying About Althusser Creating a Turn in Marxist Thought? Barbarism in the morning, socialism most every night. Don't know whether to cry in shame or just turn out the light. A change is coming. I feel it in my bones. An ill wind blowing. Time to pack my bags and head for home. Barbarism all morning. Socialism in the night. Chop liver on a matzah. Will surely make it right. This poem is for W.J.T. Mitchell, Tom Mitchell. So Paul and Tom, both is kind of so incredible editors, critical inquiry in case of Tom Mitchell, saying over the same period, decades, both stepping down this year. And Tom did a section for the Brooklyn Rail on Twilight of the Gods, which is something that comes from Nietzsche, in which reflection on your ideals or hopes or dreams, perhaps, in youth, in the way I'm interpreting it. And I did a poem for that issue, but this one I wrote for Tom on Twilight of the Gods itself. Idols of summer gone, winter stays. Lost my love in a storm, won't be back this way. Every day's twilight. Life sits on the shelf next to clutter of bric-a-brac, Lysol cans, rumpled felt, idols of salad days, utopias of youth don't add up to a hill of beans or a ride on a glass-bottom boat. Idols of times gone by sting like those hissing green flies. Buzz over, buzz kill lingers on. Climate changes, or maybe just catches up. Summer idols gone. Winter doesn't stay. Lost my love in a storm. Won't be back this way. So finally, I'm going to do something I did with an Italian poet who's translated a work of mine into Italian, or my selected poems, and it's very famous, Catullus 5. So it's our version of Catullus 5, so going back for Latin translation. Catullus actually a little bit earlier than Claudio Amberian. We have no real direct evidence that Amberian read Catullus, but I feel he must have. But perhaps not this particular poem, but some of you will be familiar with this poem. Let's live and love my Lesbia. Forget those tired rumbles of the old. Who could care less? Day's light rises and falls till it sets once and for all on our never-ending sleep. Give me 1,000 kisses, then hundreds, 1,000 and 100 more, forever add thousands to hundreds. And when we get beyond count, we'll lose track of numbers, forget them all, so that no one who'd harm us will ever know how many times we kissed. Thanks. Tribute to Paul. So I guess we're going to take some time for questions, and I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to agree with every other question, disagree with the other ones, and then on the third, I'm going to say I don't understand what you're talking about. You need to rethink it and rephrase it. So, just like to give structure to what I'm doing. But no, I'm very sorry. I'm to interrupt. Jim, how about you guys? Questions? No? That's great. It all made complete sense to you. Okay.
Oh, I have one.
Good, okay.
So how have technological shifts impacted the way that you write?
Technological shifts? Well, that's a great question, and one that I was I supposed to agree with that or not? I'm really involved as a poet and as a teacher in using digital technology and reproduction technology to exchange work, because the value for most poets is in exchange, and to minimize how much you're going to lose at the technical cost. So I've been involved in a lot of websites, and really also with sound archives through Penn Sound. And I think that the reproduction, for example, of sound through the audio archive, listening to poets going back 100 years, is an incredible resource that changes what we think of as alphabetical writing. And then the larger frame answer, which I can't get into here, but I just said that this reading has a lot to do with it. The alphabet itself and writing is, to my mind, a technology. Mm-hmm. And I think of it as a technology, and I try to use it and even, make apparent and make fun with, too, the technique, the making that's involved. So for me, just as digital technology and audio reproduction and the web is a technology, so was the alphabet. Especially, not so much earlier than Catullus. So that group of poets writing first century BCE were really, within the first 500 years of the alphabet. It seems like a long time, but it's still really the whole way in which they used the alphabet and created poems that you could read. Even the enunciation of the I, as in Sappho, could be understood as a technological effect. So I don't see that there's any way to separate really poetry from technology. And I think of William Spanos, who had a different, not entirely different, but certainly wrote a lot of books about technology and was interested in that question, both of the corruption of certain aspect of technology or techno-rationality, the way technology could take over, or the founder of this publication took on that question in a very comprehensive way in his work. What is there to say after you talk about technology? Bruce. Oh, by the way, I should say, I prefer comments to questions. You don't have to ask a question.
Of a one-line question.
Okay.
Would be, this is less a question than a comment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would stop, it would be kind of in your spirit. But no, I'm going to be much nastier than that. So Charles,
yes.
Have you always been so charming?
Oh God! See, that's no, only recently, since I retired. Speaking of false comments about Susan can attest to I met so many years ago. It's interesting about performance and the nature of performance. I used to read when I was years ago in a much more austere style, and I was also thinking. I mentioned this to Hortense. Because I'm very, I read just 2 nights ago and I got this, fantastic degree because I had a BA and I got this honorary doctorate. That's an entirely undergraduate. And it's a big audience, all of undergraduates, most of whom had never been to a poetry reading as far as I could make out. So I'm thinking about that and thinking about, I don't know who you guys are, but I see that you're a different, demographic is very markedly split in the room. So it seems to me there's certain kinds of things that I was thinking of, like the alphas are a line, just not even the poem, but just the line that's going to react to those of us who see what that is. And I'm assuming, may not have such a strong visceral reaction to it, that line. But so to balance that out, so I am concerned about what the experience of reading is. It relates to Love's Shadow, because I want to also keep coming back. Paul's trying to give an account of aesthetic pleasure, and against an enormous desire to scold art and to say, you know, what its deficiencies are, how it's complicit in all the terrible things. And by the way, I want to make clear, it is complicit, if not even responsible for all those terrible things, but it also gives you a reflection on it, and it gives you a pleasure of thought. So pleasure is in the foreground of it. And also, you know, I may make the reference to Sid Caesar in that particular piece. You know, I'm interested in a tradition of certain kind of comic performance, but you know, and people sometimes say, well, isn't this like stand-up comedy? Of course, there's nothing like stand-up comedy, because I'm not, I remember Anton, very important early contributor to Boundary 2, would always say he's not trying to entertain, because he would do talks. And, you know, entertain, you know, as a teacher, you have to get people's interest. And a student's interest. Otherwise, I mean, it's possible that you would work, but it's just, for me, it would be better if you kept them interested. But, you know, within entertainment and the commercial industry, you can't do any of the things that I'm doing. So to make it seem like it could be that, but of course it's nothing like that, because you'd have to cut out, talk about, you know, cutting out, it would be virtually everything, because everything has to be legible in a particular way, it can be challenging, but in a way that's been challenged over and over again, and it's sort of eschatological. So, but to be able to have a sensation of that is of interest to me.
It wasn't meant as a put down.
No, I understand, but I just want to emphasize that I'm really not charming. And I want to assure you, Bruce, and I'm going to slap you now. You see, I keep up with popular culture, although you couldn't avoid that one.
I wouldn't take it as well as he did.
Aha! Well, that's that. But he is charming, you see, Chris Roth.
True. You proved it.
Yes.
Relating to the idea of pleasure and charm, I noticed that humor is a very central component of your poetry and your performance, and I'm wondering, do you cultivate it consciously? Or is it something that you feel is like part of your personality that you would be, in a more natural sense, drawn to be funny? Because I find it, in my teaching, I would like to cultivate more humor, but it doesn't come naturally to me. I really have to work at it. I'm just not a funny person. So I wonder, you know, how do you get that humor? It's great. I mean, it made us laugh, and
you know,
a lot
I
of
think
us haven't laughed.
there are
in
a lot of
while.
courses online that you can take.
Maybe that's what I need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in the word charm, for one thing, which I should have mentioned, because I'm fascinated by the distinction within the history of poetry between charm, melos, and verse. So in other words, metrical verse would be something that was even and could be counted, as the Catullus poem says, kind of when people stop counting. And charm and melos are like magical spells and other kinds of things, weird combinations of things that have a lot of potency to them. And I'm definitely interested in charm. You know, the comic is something that has emerged, I've been writing for a long time. My early work is not as overtly comic as maybe as my work, but still for the last 30 years. I don't, you know, I think it has to do with, in a way, the way my aesthetics or my interest in sophism and in questioning any kind of received value in a kind of juggling act. The comedy is inherent to that. So it has to do with what the particular work that I do. I don't, you know, there's a lot here. I would make my typical, you know, there is a tradition of poetry, of course, that feels that the comic is abhorrent to poetry. Poetry should be sincere, exalted, and so I'm also undermining that. But nowadays I don't even feel, I don't know how much that's a prevalent view. But certainly when I was coming up as a reader, you weren't supposed to be comic. You were supposed to be deep and profound and say deep things, but also with as a sound analysis shows, a falling accent. Yeah. I felt life was coming to a close, and then I saw you there. So, I mean, you know, to me, when you get into my concept, I don't think about it.
Yeah.
I'm just always hearing different sounds and voices echoing, so I'm not trying.
It's a complicated thing. Humor is a complicated thing.
Yeah, but I'm trying not to be funny. Believe me, I'm working every day. And because There's a lot of stuff there that's not very, I mean, the Short Russian Poem is an example. Well, that is a kind of Russian joke. And then the dark times begin. I mean, and it's, you know, I have a line from an opera libretto that I wrote, Lenny Passion Show, which is about a kind of Lenny Bruce character who's a late night comedian, and his refrain is, "My humor is so dark you can't see it." So, but like even, this comes up, I mean, I've been talking about this recently more, and cognitive, not so much lack, but cognitive difference, which I never would talk about, but now I feel freer to talk about it. But I mean, I do have odd cognitive, like, I mean, I do reverse left and right and names and so on, and a lot of what might seem like I would work to come up with in my poems, like puns and reversals, are things that are constantly occurring to me. I can't turn them off. They're constantly going through my mind. I can select them. And that's similar to jokes and puns. I always think, in fact, it could be unpleasant if you spent time with me at every day, you know, to pun about Susan will attest, to pun about every single thing or sign and so on. I mean, you could be quiet and just have it yourself, but it isn't something that I work on in that way. However, in my retirement, I am starting a web class in how to be funny in poetry, but it'll be all entirely automated. I'll be charging a lot of money for it, but it'll be entirely automated and prefabricated, and we're calling that the new liberal arts university.
That's not funny.
Now you've gone too far. That's exactly right.
There's a question.
Is there a question back there? Yes?
Sorry.
I like to walk around because it's watching television shows from the 1970s, you know, they would come around with a microphone.
So speaking of 1970s, would you consider yourself the Lenny Bruce or George Carlin of poetry then?
More Lenny Bruce than George Carlin, but just because Lenny Bruce was so important to me when I was young, and still is. I write about Lenny Bruce actually in one of my pieces in relation to Anton, because Anton decided not to read poems that were already written, but to actually do talks and so on. And that's where that remark about, he was thinking of Lenny Bruce. He did not identify. But Lenny Bruce, I loved when I was young, and I love those long free form, like the Berkeley Conference. I mean, I love the jokes too. And of course, a lot of his jokes rely on ethnic stereotypes, which, would be difficult, as many comedians say, in this environment. To use. So, it's one thing about Jewish comedians, and I've written a recent piece, a lot about the sort of history of Jewish comedy. I mean, Groucho Marx would be a more obvious source for me, actually, than Lenny Bruce, but it's a combination. But, there are ethnic and other kinds of reasons why you have that history, and I relate to that history. And ingratiation, of course, also in answer to Bruce's comment. And a lot of my friends who are a little bit more hard-edged than me, in fact, they all are in a way, often would say, you're like too slippery, you're saying all these different kinds of things, maybe this, maybe that. But I think that history of ingratiation comes out of a kind of desire. What is it called when you don't want to die or be pushed into the ground? Survival. Thriving. Because you kind of dodge and you weave in a particular way, and you sort of, so that Jewish comedians can, as I did in this reading, use Jewish stereotypes. And I take advantage of that as well. And Lenny Bruce also took advantage of that particular kind of history within American culture. And I'm talking about free-thinking Jews, as T.S. Eliot said, who were the great.
Who was a friend of Groucho Marx.
That's right. Though there's that wonderful. But on the other hand, he did say the free-thinking Jews were the source of great evil in the sacred wood.
Yes. No, it was in After Strange Gods.
After Strange Gods, yeah. Free-thinking Jews, yeah. And I can, relate to what Eliot is saying. I like T.S. Eliot, by the way. And actually, I like Robert Frost, too. But I don't like all the people who like those people. That's what I'm saying, yeah. You have your hand up?
I
Yes.
have a question.
Okay.
And you mentioned voices a little bit.
Voices, yes.
Yes, and I'm wondering, in your poetry, and especially when you translate a poem, are you hearing your voice, or are you hearing the writer?
Well, that's a good question, of course. And translation is interesting. I started to bring translations into my books, I didn't do translations of whole poets' work, but individual poems, because I wanted to have the multiplicity of voices, and at a certain point, that's one way to do it. You just translate in my own way, different poets, and they're in the book, and it becomes other voices. I'm sort of often question the idea of finding a voice and kind of advocate losing your voice. But that itself is, a rhetorical gesture to just indicate that what many people think of a voice is a very contrived thing that doesn't really have to do with a voice. It's a kind of a literary persona that's supposed to be real. And so I always would say voices. I have another poem I didn't read, quoting Rimbaud, "I is another," is a famous line, that I is many others for me. So, yeah, I speak through my work. I don't think anybody listening to this reading wouldn't think that I was an author who was expressing different things, but none of the poems are actually in my own voice, whatever that would be. And so, or maybe this is the way I'm speaking now, but even this is modulated through years of teaching and rhetorical reflection. Yes?
So I have a comment and a question.
All good.
First of all, my father's name is Charles Bernstein as well. So that's
Wow.
a fun fact.
Nightmare on Elm Street?
He's a doctor as well, as you are now
Not
too.
the gastroenterologist?
No, a radiologist.
Well, there's two well-known Charles Bernsteins. One, the author of Nightmare on Elm Street, which I wrote lyrics, was published. Kenneth Kinley got the two of us together for a benefit. I actually wrote lyrics to Nightmare on Elm Street theme. But there is a person who deals with gastroenterological, Canadian
Interesting.
physician named Charles
Oh, that's
Bernstein.
fine.
But okay,
So there's my comment, my question.
multiple angles, yeah.
In terms of jokes about Judaism and being a Jew, have you ever received blowback from fellow Jews about making this kind of jokes? 'Cause I personally have. It certainly is, because I'm Jewish and I've made jokes about
I
being
can
Jewish. And
tell you genuinely and sincerely, yes.
Yes,
I
I
have
received
received blowback from fellow Jews.
Yeah.
And if I didn't, I would be failing in my work. It's a funny thing. Jewish culture, especially Jewish secular culture, is not based on agreement. That's why even all of this midrashic, and I have this in where I'm adding the commentaries where you say multiple things, and you say, well, what is what is truth? What is the original? Well, in the midrashic tradition, I would say, relates to Anne Hutchinson. I remember I said in the poem, it was a slight line, but it was when I was very interested in my conversation with Paul, that I'm a philo-Puritan. Which is a category I want to introduce, philo-Puritanism. But, Anne Hutchinson, and there's American tradition so important in Emerson and Dickinson, but also there's the antinomian tradition within mystical Jewishness, and it is that the commentary is what you perceive. The original is only understandable through perception. So you could say it a different way. But Jewish secular culture in the U.S., or non-observant culture, is, and of course this is also, by the way, of course, true of theological disagreements, but I'm not even getting into that, is based on disagreement. Most Jewish people that I know don't necessarily, there's not camaraderie in a certain way. It's the opposite. And it's not just based on competition, based on thinking, this guy is a schmuck. And there are a lot of Jewish schmucks, and there's a lot of people who think that I'm very problematic for saying that, and that I'm a schmuck. So, that's just part of, and I grew up in a household where, my father, we had terrible disagreements. I had terrible blowback from my father about virtually everything that I did or thought. And yet my life is dependent upon his making the decisions he made to leave places like the Ukraine, and all my grandparents came to America. But he was interested in business and working, and he was against art, actually. He was hostile to it. He thought it was a fraud. He thought you should believe the generals in the world, in Vietnam, and other attitudes I didn't want to repeat to you, but they were standard. He was a liberal. So he gave me plenty of blowback, enough to last for the years I have remaining. And also in respect to Jewishness, although, because of course he was ambivalent in some ways, but he was still basically felt part of the Jewish community, which he didn't feel that I was. So, I mean, that's the thing with, Zukoski you were talking about before, is so interesting in that period in the early 20th century, that by joining English literature, for him, reading Donne, he was leaving his family, he felt. And it's always a tension, and it's a real thing. And so,
Thank you.
thank you very much.